Imagine living a double life so twisted you would rather kill your entire family than reveal the truth. In the quiet suburb of Markham, Ontario in Canada, Menhaz Zaman wore the perfect mask. That of a brilliant student and a proud son. But behind closed doors, he was crumbling under the weight of a devastating secret. What drove a young man to commit one of the most shocking family murders in Canadian history? Just to hide a lie. This is the story of deception, collapse, and cold-blooded betrayal. This is the story of Menhaz Zaman. Menhaz Zaman was 23 years old and was considered by his family to be a golden boy with a very bright future. He lived in Markham, which was a suburb of Ontario in Canada, with his father, Moniruz, his mother, Momotaz, his sister, Malaysa, and his grandmother, Firoza Begum. Everything seemed to be on track for this young man. His parents loved to brag about the fact he was at university studying for an engineering degree and would soon be graduating. They couldn't wait to go to his graduation ceremony to see him pick up the degree scroll that he'd been working so hard for. Other parents that they associated with seemed quite envious that the Zamans had a son who was so straight-laced and hard-working. The family were of Bangladeshi origin and had emigrated to Canada looking for new opportunities, which they had found, and they'd become respectable members of the local community. Now, coming from that sort of background, one of the things that was very, very important to Menhaz's parents was a strong work ethic. And Menhaz used to leave the house every day and catch the bus and travel to York University, where he was studying mechanical engineering. Or this was what his family thought. But in actual fact, Menhaz had dropped out of university, and this had happened some time before. But whether it was due to family pressure or due to the fact that Menhaz thought his father was quite abusive towards the women in the family, leaving a lot of responsibility on his own shoulders, he had stopped studying for his university degree and now spent his days whiling away his time. He would go to the mall from about 8 o'clock in the morning up until lunchtime, about midday, 1 o'clock, and just spend time idling around the shops. He would also visit the local community gym, which wasted more time until he could go home, making out that he'd been to college all day. It would seem, on the surface of things, that he acted quite well, because none of his family suspected. But as the day for his supposed graduation from university approached, this would have been July the 28th, 2019, things began to fall apart. Menhaz knew that pretty soon his lie would become known. The fact was, there was to be no graduation, and all of the pride that his parents had in him would prove to have been completely misplaced. He was going to bring, in his eyes, shame upon his family, and this was something he could not stand. Now, as well as being a supposed student, Menhaz was also a keen gamer, and he was a member of a gaming community online. Most of this was to do with some form of Chinese multiplayer game called Perfect World. And to discuss the game with other players, he joined a Discord group. And for those of you who don't know, Discord is an app or an online forum quite popular with gamers, where they go on and they discuss the game and have all kinds of repartee regarding it. Other members of the Discord group knew something about Menhaz. They knew he lived in Canada and he was really into gaming. Quite often he'd be on the game before they started and he'd still be there when they left. But they didn't know anything about dark things that were going through Menhaz's mind. Because of the shame that he was about to bring on his family, he had seriously considered suicide. Now, this was no longer a problem for him because he had, in effect, lost his religion. Originally being of the Muslim faith, he had now become atheist. And indeed, it would be said by other people in the Discord group, he was openly disparaging about other Muslims and quite often trolled them and posted abusive messages about Muslims on the forum. As time wore on and the graduation day was looming, Menhaz started coming out with some very dark messages on the Discord forum. He started talking more and more about committing suicide. He didn't particularly give the reason, he just said he wanted to kill himself. And then he started saying that he was going to kill his family, again giving no reason. Now, although they were a little bit shocked, most of the people in his Discord group thought it was just some sort of dark, macabre joke. They knew that Menhaz had a bit of a dark side to him, especially when he was trolling other people. And some of them thought even this a bit extreme for him, but they just passed it off. They never thought he would do anything so bad. They still discounted it as a joke, even when he started to attach a particular date when he would perpetrate this crime. After all, it's the internet. People threaten to kill each other all the time, but it's usually just dark jokes, tinged with irony. And again, as the day approached, he started posting more and more messages, saying things like his life was about to end. However, on July the 27th, 2019, the day before he was due to, so say, graduate, Menhaz Zaman put his plan into action. Now, at the time, Zaman's father was at work and his sister was also at her part-time job at a local grocery store. But Mum and Grandma were in the house having a lie down. Now, the timescales are a little hazy, but it is thought that around about 3 p.m. in the afternoon, Zaman woke his mother and then hit her brutally with a blunt object, possibly a crowbar. He then slit her throat. Possibly due to the shock of what he'd just done, he left it for about an hour. And then it would seem he did the same to his grandmother. He hit her and slit her throat with a kitchen knife. Coldly, it would seem, and there are records for this, he then went on to play his video games for several hours, waiting for his sister to come home from work. When she entered the house, he did the same to her. He hit her with this blunt object and slit her throat. And just a short while later, possibly an hour or a couple of hours, Zaman's father returned from work. And it was at this point that he finished his killing spree. Having already killed 3 members of his close family, he did the same to his father, bludgeoning him almost to death and then making sure that he did a good job by slitting his throat. So in the space of about 9 hours or so, he had killed all 4 members of his close family that he lived with, just to hide the lie that he dropped out of university. What must have been going through this young man's mind? Heaven only knows. I don't. So picture this. He was now in his family home with 4 corpses of his close family. But did he have a crisis of confidence or guilt and call 911, summoning the police? No, he didn't. He sat down and went online to talk to his gaming friends. And whilst talking to his gaming friends, he posted a message saying, basically, I've just killed my entire family. Would you like to see some photos? And after that, he actually posted some photos on the Discord forum for all of his friends to see. It would seem that one of his friends, a female, had a slight background in forensics, maybe due to some of her studies, but she could tell the difference between a staged scene and real life. And she was shocked when she looked at the photos because she believed this to be the scene of a real series of killings. Now, this was only reinforced when Zaman posted a selfie of himself holding a bloody knife. As you might expect, by this stage, all of his online friends were completely shocked and they didn't quite know what to do. Regarding Zaman, all they had was an online gaming name and his name that he used on the Discord forum. They knew he lived somewhere in Canada, but they didn't know exactly where, so they couldn't really alert the police and other authorities to go to the scene. And at this moment, it would seem that these poor group of gamers were the only people in the entire world who knew about this quadruple homicide. What were they to do? Can you imagine the dilemma going through each of their minds? One of the first things that one of the Discord members did was to do like a reverse Google search. In this way, they checked to see if the photographs that Menhaz had posted were indeed real or whether he'd taken them from the dark recesses of the internet somewhere. But this drew a blank, so it was pointing more and more to the photographs being real. On top of this, Menhaz had also shared a photograph to verify that the people in the killing photographs were indeed his family. The photograph he shared was of the entire family cutting a birthday cake. And by this stage, the other members of the Discord group were becoming more and more alarmed. The group felt that in order to alert the authorities, they needed desperately to find his address. And they felt the only way they could do this was to find his IP address. And again, for those of you who are not familiar, an IP address is like the address of the device, the computer or the mobile phone or whatever other device that the person is using to connect to the internet. It is unique to that particular device and the area that it's in, but it doesn't narrow down the exact location. Now, while they were beginning their detective work, they kept talking to Menhaz. They kept him talking and on the forum, but he wouldn't give out his address when questioned. Tracking down someone's IP address and their real address from that is an immense task online. Sometimes they are misleading, especially if people are using something called a VPN or a virtual private network. This means they're connecting through another location to hide their own. So even if they got his IP address, they had no way of knowing if it was true. But as they looked deeper and deeper, including using a Skype address that Menhaz sometimes used to converse with them, they felt they were getting closer and closer. There are one or two different accounts as to how they eventually tracked him down. And one of these versions was given to a magazine by members of the internet group when they were interviewed. Said that basically Menhaz started asking them for their email addresses because he wanted to send them some money. And for this he was proposing to use PayPal, which I'm sure most of you have heard of. With some canny detective work, one of the members of the Discord group managed to look at some payments which had been made by Menhaz previously and track down an address. And this was in Markham, Ontario, in the suburbs. They immediately alerted police, who attended the Zaman residence at around about 3 p.m. on the 28th. When they entered the property, they found 4 dead bodies who had been, it would seem, murdered in an horrific fashion. They also found Menhaz Zaman at the scene and arrested him immediately on suspicion of murder. He was taken to the police station, and after a short investigation and his admission, he was initially charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. Now, this terrible incident shocked the entire community. How could a young, brilliant, loving son have slaughtered his entire family? It was beyond belief. But when interviewed by police, Zaman simply admitted he'd killed his family because they were about to find out the lie that he'd been telling for years, that he'd been going to university and was about to graduate, and he couldn't live with the guilt and the shame. But rather than kill himself, he found it easier just to dispose of his family. During the interview, he repeatedly referred to himself as worthless and subhuman. He also said that he'd killed his family because he'd lost his religion. He was no longer Muslim. He'd turned atheist and he was scared of death, which is why ultimately he'd not killed himself. He was held in custody, and in September of 2020, he pled guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder and a count of second-degree murder in respect of his mother. It's entirely possible that had the case gone to trial, he would have been charged with first-degree murder in respect of his mother, but because it didn't go to a full trial, because he'd admitted to the murders, the court accepted his plea. A couple of months later, and we have to remember this was in the middle of the COVID pandemic, he was taken to a COVID-restricted courtroom where he was sentenced. In sentencing him, the judge spoke about how it was such a massive betrayal of those who loved him, as well as being a heinous crime. He also said that this crime was deserving of very, very severe punishment. And this indeed was what Zaman got. At age 24, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole for 40 years. This would mean that when he was eligible for parole, he would be 64 years old. So that was all of his young life and his middle age gone. Zaman had been keeping his secret for years, but because he couldn't live with guilt and being found out, his entire family paid the price. But we also have to think of his friends in the Discord community. What must this have done to them mentally? They were the first ones to find out about the murders. Were they left thinking that had they known sooner, or had they been able to do more sooner, they might have prevented this? Who knows? In spite of that, our sympathies go out to any friends and other family of the Zamans. And we also send our feelings towards the members of the Discord group. Hopefully they will recover fully from this macabre incident and go on to live fruitful and bountiful lives themselves. And on that note, I will ask you to stay curious and stay safe, and I'll thank you for watching.